I want to welcome Anna Fox onto the sofa. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the Foundation. So we've known each other for many, many years because you first encountered me when I was teaching at West Surrey College of Art at Farnham. But before you got to Farnham, when did you decide that you wanted to be a photographer?
Well, I first got interested in photography because my father was interested in photography, and he had particular photographers that he loved, like Cartier-Bresson and Auger, and mostly French photographers. So there were a lot of books around the house. And I started using one of his cameras, and then he bought me a camera at some point, I can't remember when. And he introduced me to the idea of what you could do with black and white photography, I think, predominantly. He also had a darkroom. So I was about 14, I think, when I started taking some pictures and printing them in his darkroom and learning all those kinds of things, which were very exciting.
And so you arrived at Farnham, and of course, one of the things you're known for is your colour work. And I guess it's just the decade when colour photography was becoming, being discovered. The documentary photographers like Paul Graham, myself, were around. When did you switch from black and white to colour? Was that switch immediate?
No, I think I spent the whole of my first year at Farnham still working in black and white. And then increasingly, with the influence of both of you, and also I think you brought in Sally Euclair, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, for a lecture, and she introduced us to that whole range of people she was showing in the New Colour books. And I think suddenly then it really sort of hit me how interesting it was. And it was coupled with this thing that, again, you all were promoting, and her too, or talking about, let's say, is this thing about looking at the everyday rather than looking at bizarre or newsworthy things. And I thought the two things together really hit a strong note for me, that because I wasn't keen on the idea of travelling miles from home. I know I do now, but I wasn't keen on it at the time. And the idea that there were interesting things on your doorstep, and there was a whole different way of photographing. I just found it really, really interesting.
And your first project, if I remember correctly, was about Basingstoke, and you couldn't have a more pedestrian town than Basingstoke, really.
But it wasn't my first project in colour, actually. The first one, which I will show a few pictures from tomorrow, is one we did. I think it was a Paul Graham project did in the second year, and it was about suburban life or life in a small town. And then I also did some colour work on Hayling Island, which was, I think, after we'd come on a field trip to your house, and we'd seen your...
The house being in Liverpool.
Yeah. There was about 6 of us came to on a field trip there. And we saw the first of your New Brighton shots. And I remember being totally astounded by them, not least because of the colour and the use of flash. And so I'd made some work in Hayling Island, a very sort of small body of work over one or two winters, something like that. And then went on to make the Basingstoke work. And at which point I moved to the medium format as well.
And so Basingstoke, I imagine, really was the time when your voice started to emerge in photography.
Yeah. Well, I suppose so. I didn't realise it at the time, but yes, I would say that was the first piece of work that feels most like, the voice that I wanted to have in photography.
And then, of course, the first book that you had published was Workstations. And was that started when you were still at Farnham, or was that something you did immediately after you left?
No, immediately after I left, I got a commission with the Scott Gallery in Lancaster. Martin Parr and I had a commission each there. And I photographed the British gas offices in colour. And then I applied for the Workstations commission, which was advertised by Camera Work Gallery in the Museum of London. And obviously they didn't call it Workstations, but I think it was about London office life, and I applied for that. So I had pictures from Basingstoke from offices, because offices was one of the areas that I chose to photograph, and then pictures from the Scott Gallery commission as well. So I had quite a lot of photographs of offices in order to get me the commission at Camera Work.
Okay, so when you were photographing these offices, you would spend days and days in these places walking around, and how did it work? How is the actual process of the actual shooting?
For workstations, it was all fairly similar actually for Basingstoke as well. Some of them, it depended on the access they allowed. There weren't very many that allowed me to go back and back. Rank Xerox allowed me lots of access, and I think I spent several weeks going in and out and in and out. And most of the others would probably only let me in for a day or two maximum, so I might be able to go back and reshoot. But I photographed a lot of different offices. So each time I photographed a new office, I sort of found myself looking for different things, and then obviously refined the process as I went along as to what I was looking for. And it was quite nice to do all the different ones as well, because I mean part of it was to look at what were all the different kinds of offices in London. You know, not just one kind of place. So very small places in Wembley, small sort of quite rough places, through to also small but brand new places in Docklands, and then the big offices like Lloyd's and Rank Xerox and Prudential and places like that.
And camera work we associate with this black and white, very politicised photography. What made them think about employing this young female student working in colour in offices? It seems contrary to what you'd expect them to do.
I think they changed staff at that time, and in fact Anna Harding was the main curator there. She had been the photography officer at Southern Arts and had taken the Basingstoke work on a Southern Arts tour as soon as I graduated. And so she was interested in a whole new kind of photography.
And then, as far as I can make out, the next sort of phase of your career, you went into photographing, Hewitt Road, which is where you lived, and you eventually published a book about 41 Hewitt Road. And you did various projects about the cats and notes from home, etc. What made you go and look much more internally, domestically, rather than this more outgoing approach you employed with the offices?
Okay, well, there were some things in between that. So there was Friendly Fire, which was directly connected to the offices, because I heard about people doing these war games, and my brothers were doing these war games, and they worked in offices. And offices were using paintball war game places as a sort of training ground for their sales staff. So I found that absolutely fascinating. So I went and did a whole project on the paintball. And then I got another commission from what was the cross-channel photographic mission to do a project called The Village. And that was the first project where I was looking much more at my own history and my own life, because it was the village where my grandmother lived and my mother had been brought up. And even though I only photographed my grandmother a little bit, it wasn't directly about her or anything like that. It was about the women's lives in the village. And then at some point, Val Williams interviewed me for the oral history of British photography. And I asked her if she wanted to write for the village project, which I hadn't got very far with. And I was struggling with, because I was trying to work in the same sort of way that I'd been working with the colour images, medium format and the text captions. And it wasn't really working. And so she, I don't know how this happened, but she suddenly said, I'd rather do something different. I'd rather work like more, she didn't actually say as a collaborator, but it's almost what she became, but in a different way on the project. So I told her a story about my mum being spied on in her garden. She said, why don't you go and take some pictures of the garden? So I literally went and photographed the gardens in black and white rather than colour, through the hedges as if I was spying on them. So then they looked like scenes where something had happened or was about to happen. And then between us, we constructed this whole idea of the village installation, which was a box. I don't know if you've seen it.
I didn't see that, no.
It's quite literally a box with the black and white pictures. Well, actually, in the first place, the black and white pictures are all around the wall, and the box is in the centre. And it's got a curtain that comes out of the village. And around the bottom is a series of texts, which are the jobs the women in the village did, the names of their houses, the names of the flowers they grew and how long they'd lived there. And then you went inside and the colour pictures were projected massively. I got some of those old projectors, what they call Kodak. Carousel projectors and wide-angle lenses. So the images are projected very large on the wall. So you go into quite a small box and the images are projected all around you. And I think in the first one was on the floor as well. And then Val and I had been and recorded a soundtrack with the quotes that she'd edited. and we recorded it at the National Sound Archive, and it was us whispering these quotes plus the BBC soundtrack, which is called The Village, and it's just birds and bees.
But where did this lead you? Having done this installation, did this make you rethink how you would produce your work and images?
Yes, it was like a bit of a release in a way, because I felt I got a little bit caught into the same approach, just applying that to everything that I did.
And then, then you go and do this huge project at Butlins, in fact, which appears to where you're going away from these sort of domestic, inward-looking projects, going to something where you're photographing, a place and doing it in a more traditional documentary style. How did this whole Butlin project come about?
That again was a commission, and so between Butlins, Chichester University, and Pallant House Gallery, they put together the commission, and Butlins gave me access because I was doing the commission. I still really, even though I was doing the work at home, the domestic work and all the rest of it, it's not that I didn't want to be the photographer photographing it outside. I just wanted to have a different perspective, especially when I was spending more time at home. So the Butlins commission, it had two parts to it because one of the reasons they wanted to be photographed is because they're rebranding. I don't think they thought it through entirely. I think it was just one guy in Butlins who was quite interested in art photography. He invited me and the woman from Chichester to come and do this commission. But the rest of the team at Butlins and all the management and the PR people didn't know anything about it. So I realised quite quickly that I had to get some of the things that I wanted to get as quickly as possible, because I knew it was going to get difficult in there. And the thing that was so interesting was this difference between the adult breaks and the family holidays, and the fact that they were all happening in the same place. Mm-hmm. And the adult holidays were part of the rebranding, but Butlins didn't really want to say that. They wanted their rebranding to be that they appeal to a much more middle class kind of audience. And they wanted
getting away from the traditional chalets and the red coats.
They've probably all gone now, the chalets. I was actually banned from photographing the chalets.
Really?
I was told I absolutely couldn't. And I have to say there were some extraordinary working conditions that are really dismal. They're really, really dismal, that I wouldn't have been allowed to photograph.
So did you realise you were basically employed to do a PR job?
Well, no, it wasn't quite like that. So the guy who employed me, he didn't let anybody else know that I was being commissioned, and he was a lover of art-based photography, and he also loved the John Hine pictures, and so he wanted somebody else to come in and do that sort of thing. When the PR people and what have you started seeing pictures coming back, they started getting very uncomfortable and upset about it, by which time I'd photographed most of the adult parties that I wanted to photograph, and because I knew they would put a stop to it at some point. Yeah. And then I moved on to the family holidays, which were a completely different thing to photograph. Mm-hmm. It wasn't at all comfortable to walk around with a camera and a portable flash and start snapping people.
And were you staging these pictures then?
Not then. When I started, I was just walking around photographing.
Right.
And so then I started thinking more about the John Hine pictures, and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to do a modern version of those, or as close as I could get? I couldn't afford a massive team. Mm-hmm. Well, I did have a team for a while. And so, and also I'd been longing to try making documentary work on a 5x4 camera. Mm-hmm.
Just to make your life a bit more difficult.
Well, yeah, but I was always really impressed with the Chris Killett work. I've completely forgotten which book it's in, but the stuff that he did, the stuff that he did on the 5.4, was so close to people. And I'm just thinking, it's just, and when you see it as a print, it's just amazing. The quality of a large print that's come from a 5.4 camera. No, I just thought now's the time. It's quite a big commission, so I can actually afford to get some people to come and help. I had a whole lot of lights. I can borrow lights from the university. And so I came with a team of people and I found scenes that looked like sort of mini theatres and didn't exactly stage things. I waited for things to happen and took pictures over a period of time in each location. Mm-hmm. I had people doing model releases. I had to go and talk to everybody as they came into the shot, tell them what was happening. And the great thing about it is people were much more receptive to the idea of a big camera, a lot of lights, a group of people, and they enjoyed being in the shot. They understood it much better than me wandering around with a ploughboy and a flash or whatever.
And do you think these problems you encountered at Butlins stopped you going down a more commercial road, and you ended up making teaching your main career?
When we were being taught, there was a lot of talk within the university. I mean, generally, not necessarily from people like yourself, sort of anti-commercial talk. So, I mean, fashion photography was generally disregarded as being grim, and advertising the same. And that's how it was talked about. And we were taught about people like Man Ray, but we weren't talking about their fashion careers. Mm-hmm. And it was omitted completely. And I know there are some places that are still like that.
Yeah. And do you think that's a mistake then?
I do, yeah. Mm-hmm. Very big mistake. And as soon as I was head of the department at Farnham, I completely changed that. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can't be educating all these photography students and telling them that
they can have a fine art career, because it can't happen.
No, not only that, but the commercial side of the fine art business is just as, if you like, dirty as the commercial side of any other part of the business.
And one of the things about your career, which we all know so well, is your incredible relationship with India.
I first went when I was a student in 1984, mm-hmm. and I went with an Indian friend, and I was supposed to go for 3 months, and I ended up just there for 3 weeks or something. So it was really nice to go back. Right. And
as well as your educational connection there, have you done much work in India yourself?
I have, but I've not really published any of it yet. It's a bit crazy. I keep expanding it. I started 3 things that will probably blend into 2, and I can't seem to stop expanding them. They've got to expand a bit more and then retract. But I'm going to have to finish one of them as soon as possible, because it's driving me a bit mad.
And then finally, you're going to embark on this road trip with Karen Noor.
Yeah.
What's it like working again with another photographer, doing a collaborative project?
Working with Karen is different again. It's a really great thing for me to do, because she was one of the other tutors at Farnham who I worked a bit with. And, my early work was very influenced by, her, you and Paul Graham. And we both got interested in it because we both started the project Fast Forward Women in Photography, which has been a continuing research project trying to discover the stories of women photographers across the globe. And it's made us more interested in things like the Berenice Abbott work on Route 1, which is what we're retracing, and thinking about why up until recently, it never was as well known as it probably should have been. So, from that perspective, it's really interesting to be 2 women on the road, thinking about ideas to do with the contemporary situation in the States, what the States represents, what Berenice Abbott was trying to do, but also thinking about each other's ways of working, which is because we've got to make a series of work that fits together. And actually, we work quite differently, Karen and I. So
when you present the pictures finally, will they be co-authored, or will you say
Yes, they're all co-authored. Everything's co-authored. Everything's co-decisions about how we put it together and what we will actually do. We're working on a range of different cameras, from large format to iPhone, and seeing what happens in between. The most interesting thing, really, I mean, it's great to have a conversation with somebody when you're making a body of work about what the ideas that you're thinking about, instead of just having the conversation with yourself.
Right.
And so lots more things come up, and the other thing about the different ways we shoot has just been very interesting, because Karen shoots incredibly formally, everything's very straight, and for me it's not like that at all. And so we both compromised a little and come more towards each other, which makes a completely different kind of image.
Look forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
Okay, Anna, thank you very much.
Okay.